can be done, and it's the fundamental public health measures that have been used across China and in many other countries that have shown that transmission can be reduced. So it's a difficult question to answer. There isn't one global answer to that, but in each individual countries we should be asking that question.
Thank you very much. You know, we can see the extent of the problem when we try to see what the situation looks like by a group of countries, for instance. Out of the more than 100 countries now, how many? 110 countries who have reported. 43 countries have less than 10 cases. So we're saying, especially those countries, 43 countries with less than 10 cases, moving into cutting this from the bud and containing and blocking transmission or secondary transmission is possible. Then if you take the additional 36 countries have 11 to 100 cases, the same. This could be, they're in a better position again to follow the same strategy. So take those countries with less than 100 cases. These are 79 countries out of 110. That's why we're saying let's not make a mistake by taking the more than 100,000 cases in more than 100 countries just as a lump sum without showing or without seeing into what it looks like when you categorize it by country. So mind you, 79 countries less than 100 cases each. And a good number of them, 43, actually less than 10 cases. That's why each and every country has to assess its situation and do, you know, aggressive containment strategy to cut it from the bud. Then take the countries we have. 6 countries, more than 1,000. This is including China. And even then, when you have thousands of cases, we have seen from China and Korea that you can actually make a dent and you can reverse the tide. So this is what we are saying. Less than 100 cases, 79 countries, probably better suited to have a successful containment strategy and ultimately stop the transmission. But even those with higher number of cases, more than 1,000, let's say 6 countries, still there is a possibility because countries are showing that. So we're being pragmatic, we're being realistic in proposing as WHO that whether we call it pandemic or not, we're really close now with a qualitative change of spreading into 100 countries, but still the comprehensive approach or the blended approach of using the containment strategy and other strategies, containment and mitigation all in one, is very important. So the message here is, even if we call it a pandemic, still we can contain it and control it. That's what we are saying. It could be a matter of time, but if we give it our best, it could be the first pandemic. I said it earlier, that we can make sure that we don't live with it. So pandemic doesn't mean that we say, okay, it's fine to live with it. We're saying it could be a pandemic, but we shouldn't accept to live with it. We can contain it. But there is pandemic like flu that we have agreed for several years now to live with it, even when we have vaccines and so on. But on this one, it's very fatal, by the way, even if it affects the elderly. And we shouldn't choose to live with it. That's our message. And we should give it our best. And we can win this battle. That's what we are saying from WHO.
Thank you very much. We have time for one last question because we promised it to John Cohen from Science. John, can you hear us this time?
Yes, I hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead. This is the last question.
I want to ask. Thank you so much. I want to ask a pragmatic, practical question about the elderly. Given that the mission report found 21.9% mortality in the over 80 group, my mother is 90, and I have a personal question that I think applies to a lot of people around the world. Should she stop meeting with her friends now? She lives in California, and there's virus spreading there. And I think she should stop her card games and her mahjong games and start the social distancing earlier. And I wonder why WHO and CDC in my country don't explicitly tell this to the over 80 population to start the social distancing early. What do you think?
Thank you, John, for that question.
Thanks, John. Always the easy questions. Your point is very well made. We issue risk management advice to countries, and we obviously want to leave it to countries to make specific recommendations to specific risk groups or specific age groups, depending on the risk profiles in those. An 80-year-old in one country is very often not the same as an 80-year-old in another country, and depending on those population dynamics, that can be different advice in different places. But given the fact that our elderly are very vulnerable, I would definitely say that in terms of, for example, visiting long-term care facilities and nursing homes, that nursing homes should be making immediate arrangements to reduce the risk of introducing disease into those settings. I think certainly more elderly members of our community, particularly those with underlying conditions, should be. And I think already that advice is pretty much out there. I mean, people have been, the advice has been to all people, and particularly to vulnerable people, to limit their contacts in crowded situations, to be exacting in their hand and other hygiene. But you are correct. Maybe we do need to push forward and be more precise in our advice to that group in terms of attending gatherings, for example, travel and other things. And we will definitely take a strong look at that in the coming days. And again, we don't want to, as the DG has just said, there is this perception that mitigation as a measure is just about waiting for a long-term vaccine and trying to reduce mortality while that happens, and that mortality will happen in elderly people. The DG has made it clear what his views are on that. We have to move towards a strategy of control. It's not about mitigating the worst impact. In a flu pandemic, you are mitigating in the sense you don't have an element of controllability. You can't stop the virus in any meaningful way. So you focus on reducing the impact of the virus. A control strategy says you have an element of control. And what you do is both seek to control the virus and reduce its impact at the same time. And I think we've had this unfortunate emergence of camps around the containment camp, the mitigation camp, and different groups presenting and championing their view of the world. And frankly speaking, it's not helpful. I think we need to now look at the last 8 to 10 weeks. We need to look at what we've learned about this virus, both negatively in terms of its concerns and positively around what can be done about the virus. And we need to put our heads together and evolve our strategy. Not to live on strategies of the past, and the past maybe years ago, but the past right now with this virus is 8 weeks ago. What have we learned? Has our strategy evolved? The DG has said a blended strategy that takes the learning of the previous 8 to 10 weeks and puts that into an evolved approach that allows every country to design a strategy for controlling this virus that's best adapted to their circumstance and to the global needs. And I think within that, going back to your question, John, we have to be within that very precise and maybe increasingly precise in our advice to high-risk groups.
Yeah, no, so much. By the way, in my statement today, when I outlined the fundamental elements of the response, I said all of them, actually, the fundamental principles apply to all countries. And I have tried to outline them. And one of them is what you just said. I started with emergency response mechanisms, risk communications and public engagement, case finding and contact tracing, then public health measures such as hand hygiene and social distancing. But the social distancing is not just for the elderly only, it's for the others too. So where we should apply, especially in countries where we have community transmission, then it has to apply to all. So it will not be just for the elderly only. So we need to have tailored interventions based on the 4 categories which I have already announced in my statement.
Thank you very much. We will conclude with this for today, and I apologize to journalists online who were not able to ask questions, such as Helen Branswell, then we have Zahar from BuzzFeed, we have Banjo from Down to Earth, Andy Kopsa and others. We will have another opportunity on Wednesday, so please stay with us. We are sending regularly news from our offices in other countries when we send audio files, so have a look for that. Thanks everyone and have a nice evening.
Yeah, it's hard for me.